Hello guys, recently on Laravel Daily I launched a totally fresh new course, Laravel 12 for beginners, creating your first project. So in that course we're creating something simple but very practical list of blog posts with URLs for categories, with about us static page, URL management and stuff like that. So in this video I decided to shoot a video version of that, also for free on YouTube, no membership required, the same as this free course. The only two differences from text-based course is in the text-based course you will see the link to the repository, and also text-based course contains another section of authentication and data CRUD, which isn't present in this video because of the change in Laravel 12 starter kits, which I explain at the end of this video. But in short, in this course I'm still using older Laravel Breeze, which is still available and still functioning, so I'm not in a hurry to use the new Laravel 12 starter kits, but maybe in the near future they change and upgrade something with starter kits, so I would need to reshoot this video in case of that change. So that's why I left this part only in text-based course, and I will link that in the description below, but the first two sections are upcoming in full in this video. And if you happen to like this course for beginners in video and in text format, and you want more courses, today is the last day of the current discount promotion for Laravel 12, where you can get all of those courses and premium tutorials. There's a huge list now, I don't remember, it's 60 or 70, something like that, with new courses upcoming, 40% off yearly or lifetime membership with the code Laravel 12 until March 18th. But no worries if you're watching after that, I still have the discount for you as a beginner at the end of this video. So for those who watch until the end, which means to me that you're actually ready to go from beginner level to something higher, there will be a discount code somewhere at the end of this video. And now let's try to create your first practical Laravel project from scratch. First, before installing Laravel application, we need to prepare the tools, the environment for PHP and Laravel, and according to the official Laravel documentation, you need PHP, Composer, and Laravel installer, and of course web server like Apache or Nginx, and Node and npm to install the front-end dependencies. It may seem like quite a lot, but Laravel has a few commands, a few tools, a few options to make it all automatic. So first there is a command to install PHP and Composer, so this is for different operating systems. And also if you scroll down below, there is Laravel Herd, a tool that installs everything for you, even from new computer. This is what I personally use myself. This is how it looks. It's for Mac or Windows. So on top of my Mac, I have menu to, for example, switch PHP versions or manage other tools that come installed with Laravel Herd. So I do recommend that for the fastest preparation for Laravel. Keep in mind some of the features are in Herd Pro. For example, MySQL version, which is important for most developers, but you don't have to pay. Separately, you can install a tool like DB Engine, which I use locally. So I have MySQL and PostgreSQL locally, which I run from DB Engine and not Herd. So after you install that, we can create a new Laravel project. So in my terminal, in the main folder of Herd, I'm running Laravel new, and the folder, the project name, it would automatically create that folder. And we have a wizard that would ask us a few questions. Let me open that up. Which starter kit do you want to use? For now we choose none, because starter kits is a separate big topic, because for those you need prerequisites like learn React, Vue or Livewire. So for this course we will choose none, and the installation process begins, installs Laravel and dependencies of Laravel. Now what database you want to use? By default it suggests SQLite, but you can switch that to MySQL, and we will switch later in this course, but for now let's use SQLite, which will automatically create the SQLite file, so you don't need to create that database manually. And then the question is, would you like to run npm install and npm run build? We choose yes, so it would compile front-end asset for us for the home page. And that's it. Now we can launch our homepage in the browser. And here we go. The domain is laravel.test, corresponding to the folder name, which is powered by Laravel Herd, which parses the domain name with folder. And there we go, we have Laravel 12 installed. Now let's explore where this page comes from and, for example, change some of the text. we open the file called routes web.php, where Laravel lists all the URLs and routes. For now we have only one URL, / means homepage, and view welcome means that it shows the HTML file of welcome, which is in fact not HTML, only it's called Blade, welcome.blade.php. Blade is a template engine of Laravel that allows to add variables, if statements, and other structures inside of that HTML. So in that Blade, let's try to change some text. For example, we can find, if we scroll down, the text of let's get started in H1 with a lot of Tailwind classes. By default, Laravel homepage uses Tailwind, and Laravel itself is kind of pre-configured for Tailwind 4. So if you go to package.json of the Laravel installation, you see Tailwind 4 here. So that's why you see a lot of Tailwind classes, but let's change just the text. For example, welcome to Laravel. We save that file, we refresh our page, and we see welcome to Laravel. So this is how easy it is to change the text in the Blade inside of HTML. Now let's try to create a new page, new Blade file with new URL, and I will show you how the routes work if we add something else. So welcome, let's do file save as, and save it as second.blade.php. And on that page, instead of welcome to Laravel, let's change that to welcome to second page. And then in the routes web, we copy the same route get structure with callback function of PHP and do second URL would correspond to the view of second Blade file, and Blade files are all located in the folder resources views. So by doing view second, we actually refer to resources views second.blade.php. And now if we type in the URL of /second, we have the page with the text welcome to second page. So this is how you create new pages corresponding them to routes of your website. If someone launches the URL that does not exist, for example third, then Laravel would show 404 not found, error page. But if, for example, that route exists, but the Blade file doesn't exist, for example, there is a third route, so Laravel would find it, then would try to find the Blade view, which doesn't exist, third, then we refresh and we get 500 error, 500 status code, not 404. So let's delete that. And now I will show you a more simple syntax. So by default, Laravel suggests to have PHP callback function as a result of that route, but you can use a special route view if you don't have any more logic and you just need to show the Blade file. So route view URL / would correspond to welcome, and route view second would correspond to second Blade. So you don't need callback function. Instead of those two, these two lines are identical. Let's double check. Second still works. Homepage still works. Great. Now let's try to create our own page, simple page with header and footer and a few links instead of this homepage. For that, I asked ChatGPT to create a very simple Tailwind homepage with About Us and Contact on top. It did a pretty good job. And now, for example, let's create home.blade, or I will do file save as from existing Blade, and I will paste it from my notes, paste the Tailwind homepage. Then we change that welcome to home. Second, let's leave it. I will not delete it, so maybe you can still use it for your experiments. But now if we reload the homepage, it looks like this. Header, menu items, footer, and some text. Very simple design because I want to show you the structure, not the pretty visuals. But this homepage uses Tailwind, and I want to explain how Tailwind works in Laravel. By default, in this text, in this HTML, Tailwind is loaded from CDN, which is good for playing around, but not good for actual real projects. You need to compile the Tailwind to make it smaller and use only the classes that you actually use in this HTML. So for that, let's return to our welcome Blade and see in the header how the default homepage does it. And this is the code. Let's close the sidebar. If statement with Blade directives commands start with @ symbol. So there's if else. If we have these files existing, then we load the CSS and JS with Vite server, which is already compiled. Otherwise, if we don't have those files, then the homepage of Laravel loads the style from Tailwind, Tailwind 4 inline, not even CDN, but already compiled the classes that are used specifically on the homepage. And that if statement actually means whether we have executed npm install and npm run build or npm run dev on our server. If we do, then Vite server would automatically compile our assets, CSS and JS, and then you would see the files in the public folder here on the left, public build assets, CSS and JS. And this is exactly what we need to do. So if we copy if else to our home blade instead of that CDN Tailwind, this is kind of what we need. But now if we load our homepage, it would not work. Why? Because it's loading the compiled assets from the old Tailwind from the home page, these ones. So we need to recompile them with npm run build or npm run dev. So in the terminal, after installation, I cd to that folder and do npm run build, for example. You can do npm run dev and leave it in the background, but I prefer npm run build, and now we refresh and we get our Tailwind back again. And with that, we don't even need that if statement anymore, because we don't need those styles anywhere outside of homepage, which we don't even use anymore. So we can simplify that to just one line of Vite. Let's refresh, still works. So this is how Tailwind works in Laravel. You just put Vite on top in the head and execute npm run build or npm run dev after the changes in your CSS in HTML. Final note about CSS: if you prefer Bootstrap or any other framework, Laravel doesn't restrict that at all. It just uses Tailwind by default, but then you need to tackle everything manually. For example, load the CDN Bootstrap theme or configure package JSON with npm according to Bootstrap or your other preferred front-end framework. Now let's create those pages about us and contact, and I will show how to create reusable layout in Blade, because our current home Blade contains both header and footer and the main part. So if we do save as, for example, and do about Blade, and then instead of the main content welcome to our homepage, we change that to about us, for example, and change the text to the best company in the world. Great, we create the route for that. So duplicate that, about, and about here. By the way, this is optional, the slash up front. And if we click that slash about, it actually works. But the problem is duplicated code. In the home blade and in the about blade, a lot of things are repeating. So this is where layouts come into place. And in Blade, there are two ways to create layouts: with Blade components or with inheritance. Both are equally valuable. It's a personal preference, but I prefer the inheritance, which means that there's the main Blade layout and Blade pages extend that layout. Let me show you. I will create a file in resources views folder, layouts subfolder, and then app Blade. For now it's empty, but let's copy the contents from home Blade into app, and let's see what parts are repeating. So the header is the same for all layout pages. The footer is also the same. This part is different. So this part will be different for every page, and this will be the content. And here we use Blade directive called yield and assign the name to that portion, to that section. We will call it content. And then in the home Blade, instead of all that HTML, we delete everything and we do extends layouts dot app. You can reference Blade files, by the way, with the dot, the subfolders, and then you provide only the sections that you need to override. So we have section called content and then end section at the end, and here I paste the thing that I had cut from the home page. So this is the actual home Blade with header and footer in the layout here. If we refresh the home page, it should still work. Nothing really changed. And let's do the same for the about Blade. Instead of all of that, we just cut this, delete everything, extends layouts, app, section, content, and section, and paste. That's it. We click about us and it works. And for the contact, let's do file save as from already refactored about Blade with the layouts. Let's call that contact Blade, and let's change that to contact us, and email whatever company. And then in the routes, we duplicate the about to contact URL with contact blade. And now if we click contact here, that page also works with the URL of contact. So this is how you define layouts with repeating parts like header and footer. Also important concept with routing is route names. So as you can see, we define the routes by URLs, and then anywhere in the layout, for example, we put the links to /about or /contact. But for bigger projects, it's not flexible enough. It has two downsides. First, that / means that you refer to the homepage of the web server, and what if your website is in a subfolder? That wouldn't work. And also, if you have the same link in multiple blade files, then if you want to change that link, you need to change multiple files. Instead, it's very common to assign the name to the routes. For example, name home, name about, and name contact. Okay, and now we can reference those routes with blade syntax of these brackets and then route with its name, which is about, and the same thing, route, paste, contact, and also in here, route, home. And if we refresh, again, nothing would change structurally. It would still work, but with route names. But now it's more flexible, and if you have those links in multiple pages, you can change it only in one place in the routes, and that would still work. For example, if you want to change the URL to about us, then we refresh, and then that about us would work with the new URL, although we didn't change the HTML in here. Of course, if you're making those changes, you need to take care of SEO redirects as well, but just as a good practice, use route names when defining your routes in Laravel. Now, after working with this simple layout and explaining what blade layouts are, let's change to a more complex layout, and let's create a blog page, something like this. Again, I asked ChatGPT to create that very simple Tailwind design with the sidebar in this case. So let's move to this layout. I will do file save as layouts to blog blade layout, and I will paste it from my notes, blog homepage. Let's use Tailwind from CDN. It doesn't matter that much in our case. And again, we have yield content. And then I replace home blade with more complex page, which is again extending layout, blog in this case, and in the section content, we have many more things going on, so let's refresh our homepage now. So from this, we click here and get to this design. Now, as you can see, there's post image not loading, and in the HTML, in this code, it's referenced like this. So how do you reference the images, the static images in Blade? So all the static so-called assets are in public folder, which is already the case for assets for our CSS and JS compiled, but also it is common to place images here. So we can create a folder, public new directory images, and then inside I would put a placeholder file, which I just downloaded somewhere from the internet. Okay, I've done it behind the scenes, and we have this PNG. And now, if we refresh our homepage, it is loaded successfully. So how you reference images is asset, which by default points to the public folder, and then from public, this is your relative path to the actual image. And also, in addition to home, we will create another page for the article. So file save as article.blade.php, and I will paste it from my notes. Again, it's extending the blog layout, but the content is different and different placeholder for the article. In the routes, for now, let's hard code it, and then we will go to explore how parameters are passed. But for now, it will be article and article blade view. And now if we go to the URL of /article, we have something like this. So same layout for header and footer, but the content is different with a different placeholder, which I've put again in the public images folder. And the final thing is to update the blog layout to other pages. So about Blade will look like this with more HTML in the content, and then contact Blade, similarly layouts blog, and also pasted from my notes the same set of Tailwind classes. So now if I click about us or contact, it's with the new blog layout. Okay, the next step. Until now, we've been talking only about static data and static pages, so this is all hard-coded. How do we get that from the database with real blog posts? And first, we need to learn a Laravel concept called migration. This is where the database schema is described. In the folder Database Migrations, there are 3 files already there by default with Laravel. Here it is one file for the users table, which is users, password reset tokens, and sessions. These are the database tables, and each table is described with fields in Laravel language of migrations, which is basically table, field type, column name, and a few more features that are optional. So in this way, in migrations, you describe your tables and then run a command php artisan migrate to actually execute those migrations and create those tables physically. So for that, let's recreate our database, switching from SQLite, which was the default when we installed Laravel, to MySQL. And also I'll show you where to do that. So I've created a MySQL database called Laravel, and this is empty for now without any tables. And then I go to the file config/database.php with a lot of database configurations. And you need to choose the so-called connection, which is basically which database you use. SQLite, MySQL, also options available are MariaDB, PostgreSQL, and SQL Server. Each of them has many options, but what you actually need to do is open another file called .env. In the main folder of Laravel, this is the file with many of your settings will reside. So by default, DB connection is SQLite, which means from that config file, it takes all the parameters from this array key. So we need to change that .env to MySQL, so that's the first step, and then we need to provide all the other parameters if they are not the default ones. So let's uncomment those, and this is actually the default parameters as they are for MySQL on my local DB engine powered MySQL server. So now I'm not working with SQLite anymore, I'm working with MySQL. And we create those database tables from the migrations with artisan command. So there are a lot of terminal commands in Laravel powered by PHP artisan. So PHP artisan migrate will actually execute those migrations. And now if we refresh the database that I've shown you before, which was empty, now it's not empty anymore. It has users table and others that were described in those migration files with exactly the columns that you provided. So each column definition like string or timestamp under the hood actually creates, for example, varchar or timestamp or other field in the MySQL database. Now, a few more words about that .env file. This is a very important file which you should not push to public. So don't push it to GitHub repository. Don't upload it to the server into a public folder anywhere because it contains passwords, app keys, so whoever gets to your .env file from production server may use that maliciously. And that's why by default it is in the .gitignore by Laravel. Now with the migrations, we also need to take a look at the table called migrations. And if we take a look at the data, it is kind of a log of migrations that were already executed. So after we run PHP artisan migrate, it saves in the log, in the migrations table, what was executed and in which batch. So every time PHP artisan migrate runs, it creates one batch for all the previously unexecuted migrations executed now in one batch. So now, if we try to run PHP artisan migrate again, it will check what are the files in the database migrations folder and what were the executed migrations in the migrations database table. And in this case, it will show nothing to migrate because everything was already migrated. And let's practice creating one more table outside of the system tables in Laravel, and we will work with blogs with 2 database tables, categories and posts. So let's create category database table with another artisan command, which is PHP artisan make. And then there are a lot of commands of make something with Laravel, for example, migration. And then the parameter how that migration should be called. One of the syntax options is you open the quote and type create categories table. And then if you use these words create in the beginning and table at the end, it will automatically generate the file with contents for this table to be created. The categories becomes the name. So it generates the migration with timestamp of when you actually execute that command. And if we open it in our PHP Storm, as you can see, new file, by default, it contains the categories table name, which is exactly what you typed in here. And then by default, it suggests the columns of ID and timestamps. And in our case, this is fine. We will leave it by default. And then my local AI assistant by PHP Storm suggests table string name, which I will accept. This is exactly what we need for the categories table, just one column of name. I just want to show you how to run migrations for new custom tables. So this will be enough for now. If you want to take a look at what columns and what syntax options are available in the official docs, there's the list of columns with their own syntax, so you may check that out in the docs. So okay, let's try to execute that migration. Let's run PHP artisan migrate again, and now it will run the migration only for that migration file which was not previously executed. And now in our database, if we refresh, we have the new record in the migrations table with batch number 2 because it's a previous batch, and we'll get to batches in a minute. I will explain why they exist. And then we have new table in the database called categories with the structure name varchar. The timestamps in Laravel by default create 2 fields, created at and updated at, which are also filled in automatically when you create the record with Eloquent Model. We'll get to Eloquent quite soon in this video. Now let's talk about a thing called rolling back migration. What if you made some typo and you want to recreate the table? In migration file, you can see another method called down. So there's up method, which we executed, and then down is the opposite. So you can roll back the migrations, rolling back the last batch. This is where batch comes in. So down method executes dropping the table of categories. If it exists, there's a check. And to execute the down method, we execute the command PHP artisan migrate roll back. It will take the batch of the latest executed batch, which is number 2 in our case, and then for all those migrations, which is one migration in our case, it will execute the down method. So let me demonstrate. We execute rolling back migrations, the list of migrations that have been rolled back, and if we refresh this table, that batch like it never existed, and also we don't have the categories table in the database. But for now, let's re-execute again PHP artisan migrate because we'll actually need and use that table of categories. This is appearing again in the database. Okay, so this is the migration system for managing database schema. And if for beginner it sounds complex to you and you feel that maybe it's better to create tables manually in table plus PHP myadmin or whatever is the SQL client, it may be beneficial for you if you are a solo developer. But then the problem is how to port that database schema into staging server, live server. If you have other developers, teammates, then you do what? You export the SQL file and import and send via network. It's not convenient. So database migration system is created like GitHub repository for the changes for the database. So whoever works with that database would have the latest changes. Without exporting SQL, they would run PHP artisan migrate on their server locally or on production server if you introduce some database changes. So use database migrations from Laravel and don't create database tables manually. Okay, now let's try to take the data from the database and list those categories on the sidebar. Instead of those hard-coded technology, design, and others in the database, for now manually I've created those 4 categories with the timestamps, and let's try to list them on the sidebar. So we will modify that route view and get back to route get with callback function of PHP that would return view home again, but to that home we need to pass the parameters of categories. And the second parameter of the view function is the array of keys and values that you want to pass as variables. So in our case we have categories, and the value will be categories, not defined yet. And we will define that before the return. So categories, for example, may be empty array or may be taken from the database. From the database, there are 2 ways how to get the data, 2 mechanisms. So DB facade with query builder or Eloquent ORM model. And I know it sounds complex, so let me demonstrate. The first option is this. db table, then you provide the table name and get the data. And you need to also import in the use section db facade from Illuminate support. And then on the sidebar, which is in our home blade, instead of those hard-coded categories, we can do a for loop. In Blade, there's a syntax called for each. Syntax like this, and then the parameter is similar to for each in PHP, for each categories as category, and then we provide this as one item. Delete those hard-coded ones. Let's close the sidebar so it would be more visible. And instead of hard-coded technology, this is the Blade syntax to echo something to the screen, and we put the variable here. Category is an object of that database row, and we need to provide category name. And now if we refresh our page, we have category 1 to 4 from the database. The next step and the next thing you need to understand is Laravel controllers. So if you define the routes with callback functions like this, those callback functions may become really huge. Each of them, and also the full route file, will be huge. So instead of having callback function, that logic is placed in files called controllers. Each controller is responsible for one or more routes. So we generate again with artisan command make controller, and the name of the controller is usually with suffix of controller, and then the name is whatever is the purpose of that controller. So we have home controller, and we open that and it's empty, and then inside we create methods, one public method for each route. So for now we will create one method called index, which is usually the name for the list or the home page or default, and then inside we put the same logic from that callback function, cut and paste here. Also we need to import db on top, and for now we don't need request, so we remove that. And then in here, instead of callback function here, we provide the array of parameters, the class name of controller and the method responsible for that route. So we have home controller, the full class name, and the method of index. And of course, we could use the home controller in a shorter way if we replace that with use on top. And now db isn't needed here anymore because it is used inside of the controller. And this is how we make the route files shorter, pointing to the controllers that have all the logic, and controllers then return view files to show something in the browser. If we refresh our page, nothing really changed. We just moved the logic from the routes to the controller. Now I will show you the second way how to get the data from the database, which is Eloquent Models. Eloquent is ORM system of database layer in Laravel, kind of a layer on top of database to work with database more conveniently. So one Eloquent model has a purpose to work with one database table. And we generate that model with make model artisan command again, with the singular form of the name of the database table. So make model category. The table itself is called categories, the database table. So the model should be singular from that by default. You can customize it, but in this short course I will stick to the defaults. So this model is empty, but it's already a fully functioning model that works with a database table. And now in the controller, instead of db table, we can reference that model and do category all, like this. So we don't need the db anymore. We use model category instead. The result on the website also is the same. It doesn't change. But Eloquent is more convenient way to work with specific database tables in most cases, instead of that db facade and query builder I've shown earlier. In some cases it does make sense to use query builder for more complex queries, but by default for the beginner level I do suggest you to use Eloquent Models. And now let's show the post from the database, and for that we'll create another Eloquent model for the table post. But wait, we don't have that database table yet, do we? So we can run a command php artisan make model post with parameter -m, which stands for migration. So then Laravel would automatically create both model and related migration. And in our new post migration, we will have these fields. I've pasted it from my notes. So title, longer text, and this is where we get to the concept called relationship between the tables. This is the syntax to create a foreign key on the database level, category ID field constrained to the foreign key of categories ID. Let's run the migrations and I will show you what it actually does. So if we refresh, we have posts table now with category ID field. And if we take a look at the structure, we have this foreign key category ID to the categories ID table. And behind the scenes, I've added a few database table rows, post 1 to 4 with different categories. Now let's show them on the home page. This is where we get back to our home controller, and in addition to categories, we will also get the posts. So posts, post all, and we add them here in a key value pair inside of the same array, auto-completed by my local AI assistant in PHP Storm. But let's also add ordering. So instead of all, we can do posts, order by, for example, ID descending, and we don't need that take 3, but we do need get. So the method all is used only if you have literally model and all. In all other cases, you use get, if you have any modifiers or additional functions to the Eloquent model. Also kind of a PHP tip and trick, which is often used in Laravel while passing the parameters. This can be shortened. If you have array with key value pairs which are the same identical variable name, you can use, instead of that, use a function called compact, just listing the variables. So comma separated, categories, and posts like this instead of array. This is personal preference, you can use either or. And now if we go to our home blade, let's replace that hard-coded list of articles with what? For each loop. So we do for each posts as post, and then each of those posts will be articles. So I cut and paste here, we remove that article hard-coded, and here we will change, let's make it on a new line, we will change the title. So instead of blog post title, we'll have title here. And instead of this short description, let's do post text and shorten that to 50 characters, for example. So substring PHP function 050 and then ... like this. And let's refresh our homepage. We refresh and we have this 4 posts with ... at the end for each of them, ordered by starting from the latest one, and we're good. Finally, let's show the posts by category. So if we click the link to category 1, it should be only post 1 here shown. So on the sidebar, let's add the link to the home page with get parameter category ID equals, for example, category ID, like this. So if we refresh and click category 1, as you can see, we have the home page with that parameter. Now, how do we get that parameter in the controller? In here, in addition to order by, we can add where statement and chain that sentence with more modifiers. So we need to have category ID where request parameter. And there's a helper in Laravel called request where you can just pass the name of that parameter. And let's put that on new lines so it would be more readable. And let's refresh our page with the parameter, and now we have only post 1. So the SQL query actually filters the posts by categories. But now the problem is that if we land on the home page, we don't have posts at all. It's loading by category, which doesn't exist as a parameter. So this is where I will show you some more powerful thing of Eloquent. Eloquent has a lot of functions for filtering the database. For example, there's when function. So when we have request category ID, this is a Boolean parameter, true or false. Then we have a callback function with query as a parameter where we modify that query. This is the syntax. So then we add that where statement inside of that callback function with query where request category ID, like this with a space, and then we chain again those order by and get at the end. And now if we refresh our homepage, we have all the pages, but category 3, for example, will give us only the posts with category ID 3. But the parameter syntax with question mark like this is kind of outdated. So let me show you a better way with route model binding and parameters in routes. And for that, we'll implement the actual logic for the article page. For now, it was hard-coded, not anymore. Let's create controller for the post. So we run PHP artisan make controller post controller, and inside we will create a method called show. This is a typical name for showing a specific record, and the parameter would be post ID. And then in the routes, instead of that article, we'll have article slash parameter of post ID as a variable, pointing not to the view but to the controller. So we have post controller class and show method with the name. And let's also change route view to route get and import the post controller on top with use, like this. Then in the post controller here, we will return the view of article, but with the parameter of post. Now, how do we get that? We get individual record from the database with post model and method find. So this is exactly what we will do. And now we can pass the post with compact like this. And now in the article view, instead of those two hard-coded texts, we will change the title to post title, and the text, let's leave it in the paragraph like this, post text. Let's leave the asset and the date hard-coded. I want you to understand the main idea. So now in the URL, if we go to article/3, for example, we will get to post 3, which is taken from the database. And let's put the links to those articles in the home blade. We don't have any link, but for now we can do route article with the parameter of that post ID, which is post ID from the post object. So this becomes the parameter of routes web here, which should be the same name passed to the post controller here, and then Eloquent gets the data and passes to the blade view. So if we refresh now, click post 4, and we land on post 4. And then there's one more thing to show, which is called route model binding. So see that parameter 4? If you're passing the parameter and just calling find by ID, instead of that, Laravel suggests you to type hint the class of model, and it would take care of the find automatically. So if you type in post here like this, you don't need to call find. It would be called automatically behind the scenes. And then you don't need any request here. And in the routes web, instead of post ID, you can do just post. And on the home page, you pass not the ID, but you may pass the full object. Laravel would take care to take the ID and pass the ID. Let's double check. Go to home page, click post 4, everything still works. So this is called route model binding. And this is where I want to end this free YouTube video course for beginners, but you may continue with the same project in text mode. There's a text course, which is also free, no membership required, with another section about authentication and the full CRUD for categories and posts. The reason I decided to not shoot that in a video format is because of starter kits in Laravel 12. And this is kind of a controversial topic. Let me explain. So in Laravel 12, they released 3 new starter kits. And starter kit is a thing that gives you authentication with login and register and a few more functions inside with beautiful UI design. So users could register and then manage their posts and categories, for example. But in Laravel 12, their new 3 starter kits are React, Vue, or Livewire, which means that those 3 become prerequisites for anyone who started learning Laravel, and they need to choose one of those 3 to proceed. If you're not familiar with React, Vue, or Livewire, you cannot use any of those starter kits. You can try, but then you may struggle to create more custom functions. In Laravel 11 previously, there were 2 other starter kits called Breeze and Jetstream, and Laravel Breeze is exactly the thing for beginners, as I would call it, which doesn't require any of those Livewire, React, or Vue. Is just Blade. And in the course on Laravel Daily for Laravel 12, I've still chosen to use Laravel 11 official starter kit, Laravel Breeze. So this is the text-based course section where I use Laravel Breeze, install it, and then instead of the new starter kits which look like this, I install Laravel Breeze, and we see this login form and this dashboard. But I'm not sure what may happen in the upcoming months. There are community starter kits now available, and maybe officially they will release something Blade only, so I don't want to reshoot that video. Instead, I will just refer to this course and you may continue with Laravel Breeze. And if you want to continue with starter kits, I do have videos on YouTube, some of them already published, some of them in progress, so search the channel for React Starter Kit or Livewire Starter Kit or Vue Starter Kit, and those would be discussed separately. And also by following this text-based course with screenshots, you would feel the Laravel Daily vibe of how I usually publish courses and why text form is very often beneficial, because you can copy and paste commands and snippets and also have the links to the repository or specific even commits of those repositories. And if you do like that approach and you may want to take more courses, you may navigate to courses which are discounted for today with 40% off. So if you want to proceed with other courses or with updated learning roadmap courses, for example, you may want to learn API or React or Livewire. As I said, this is discounted for today with 40% off. But if you're watching this video after 18th of March, where that discount is already over, I have a special discount for you still for beginners. So at the end of this course for beginners, I have hidden, so to speak, the discount for those who actually make it to the last lesson, which I count you already because you made it to the final minutes of this video. So the code beginners25 will give you 25% off any of Laravel Daily Premium plans for the first 100 who would take that discount code. And yeah, what do you think about this video? Have I missed anything important, or what questions do you have that I may help you as a beginner? Let's discuss in the comments below. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.